welcome to another episode of State of the Game. I am Charles from Team COG, and welcome everybody. I hope everyone had a awesome holidays, Merry Christmas to all those, and New Year's is right around the corner. So today, guys, we're just going to strictly talk about pendulums. And the reason I want to talk about this is because of the new pendulum archetype coming out, which is released in Ancient Guardians, which is due to come out here not too far from now, I guess, and it just depends on your definition of far. There's 3 strategies in this set, one being a synchro that looks like Power Rangers, another being a giant serpent, which is supposed to be predicted to be support for Snake Rain, maybe, and then finally a pendulum archetype. And this pendulum archetype says that is hinted to be musical, and we're going to talk about pendulum in a whole and just kind of move forward. As you guys, most of you guys probably do know, if you guys want to help support the channel, hit that join button down below. It really helps the channel. It helps me just continue to do what I'm doing, and you become a part of an awesome group of community. Actually, there's an awesome group of men, and not to mention you get awesome perks and rewards. And if you guys can't help support the channel that way, look at getting a mat down below. Hit that link down below to get yourself your Breeze Before Einsatz, or your Gear Stew Rising, or your World Legacy Heroes, or a adorable, an adorable Equimax sticker, and support the channel that way. But if you guys can't do that either, please remember just to give the video a like and a subscribe at the end of the video, only if you enjoyed it. So without further ado, guys, let's just go ahead and jump into the state of the game, pendulums. So guys, pendulums themselves are an interesting game mechanic that was they're a card design, they're a card type, and they're also a game mechanic introduced in Duelist Alliance featuring Cleaforts. Now, for those out there who do not know what pendulum summoning is just simply you have these cards that are treated as monsters and spells. You have specific zones that they can be put in down below. You just place them in. If you have a scale 1, a scale 7, you can pendulum summon, which is very much like a mass special summon from your extra deck, where face-up pendulum monsters go when they are leaves the field. They do not go to the graveyard, or you can summon from your hand. You just declare pendulum 5, and if you can special summon 2 zones that link monster points to from your extra deck, or from your hand 5 monsters that are levels between 1 and 7, good. So Konami did not see a problem with this when they made it, and they actually made one of the most oppressive mechanics in the game, which eventually came out to be Pendulum Magicians, was like probably the peak performance of the entire deck. And yet also, I have people argue and say Metal Foes was really good, but I do not think Metal Foes was on the same caliber as Pendulum Magicians. But with that being said, Pendulum decks have always had a verge of competitive success, being Cleaforts, being Metal Foes, and then all the way up to Pendulum Magicians being finally released. And if you guys are Pendulum players, of course, you guys probably follow and listen dearly to your Lord and Savior, Triff Gaming. So Triff Gaming has revolutionized the way the deck is played. So instead of being separate archetypes, which they are separate archetypes in the Pendulum mechanic, there's such thing as, like I just said, Cleaforts, Metal Foes, Zephyras, Ignites, I'm trying to think of more, Abyss Actors. Oh, is there more? That's the only 5 I can kind of think of at the moment. But for the most part, they are separate. Don't forget Pendulum Magicians in there. The most oppressive deck that ever existed. One of the most oppressive decks, and I forgot it. But for the most part, Triff revolutionized the way Pendulums played and said, let's take all this bunch of good Pendulum stuff and put them together, and then we are going to practically just steamroll everyone. And by all means, that's what it does. Most of the good thing about Pendulum cards, they all kind of work somewhere together. When the deck seemed kind of like the Pendulum mechanic in itself seemed like it was getting weaker, and Konami was finally ready to kind of give up on it and move out of that, since we went into the Variants format, the new structure deck released with Endymion, and Endymion gave the deck like a full throttle powerhouse, and that full throttle powerhouse is still even felt to this day just because of how powerful certain cards are. But with that being said, Konami decided to answer the Pendulum strategy in multiple ways. The first and foremost, the worst hit, by all means, was hitting Metal Foes Electromite, which was the Link to generic Pendulum monster, which occurred so much advantage for the Pendulum strategy that it was at 3, then 1, and then when the Pendulum mechanic was not doing anything in any competitive scene, Konami just went, yeah. So with that being said, it's banned now, and on the horizon is not only this new Pendulum strategy that has to do with music and Ancient Guardians, we also have more Metal Foe support coming. Now, I know what you guys are thinking. Pendulum best deck, right? 20 negates any hand. Well, I have a man, my field agent Flexi, who is also deep within the Pendulum setting. Flexi, how are Pendulums doing right now? Pendulum! Thank you, Flexi. As you can see, they are still doing good, following the same traditions, as most Pendulum players do. I believe this is almost like communion, as it is in the Christian religion, as in Pendulum Magicians Pendulum players, not magicians, must yeet something into a wall or themselves into the wall and yell pendulum as part of the initiation ceremony to become a Pendulum player. But with that being said, let's go ahead and discuss what things need to happen in order for pendulums to become even more oppressive than they already are. Despite the joke that pendulums do set up 20 plus negates every hand, they do not set up 20 plus negates. They set up 25. Joking. They actually are very consistent in what they do, and they can put up 3 to 4 to 5 interruptions with the greatest of ease. And the deck is just very versatile in the way that it plays, which makes it very, very dangerous. And I mean very dangerous. But you can also just kind of... So what would a deck that practically has everything it needs need? You know what I mean? Arguably, the best thing I can tell you is they don't even need any more Pendulum cards. They just need Electrum back to 1, and the deck will be fine. But you know, Konami... It's very interesting because Konami would potentially release Electromite, which should have been released on the last ban list if they wanted to produce sales of these new Electromites coming out. And Electromite did not come off. And Metal Foes are actually getting another new Link Monster, which is a good Link Monster by all means, but it's not an Electromite. So, yeah, so it will be very interesting to see what this new archetype does. And that's something about Pendulum that's always very interested me, is you practically have Pendulum decks, then you have the Pendulum Mechanic dot deck, which is practically, as I said earlier, every good Pendulum card crammed together into a melting pot, and it does what it does, and it just flows so fluently because of the way the mechanic's designed. And then you have separate Pendulum decks. One of the most notable Pendulum deck that is not part of the Pendulum good stuff is, of course, Pendulum Magicians. They took a substantial hit in the form of Double Iris, Skullcrack Joker, which search any Pendulum Magician, and a few other cards. I think they've always been at least a Pendulum card hit or kind of on the list in a way. But the next best Pendulum deck that I think is super underrated that no one really pays attention to is, of course, Zephyra. Zephyra, I'll have a picture, of course, up here of Zephyra. It is just it's a deck that came out, I believe, in Cross Souls, I believe it was started. And the deck, honestly, is really good. It's a very slept on Pendulum strategy, and of course even the man himself, Triff, has said this deck is crazy. It is not your typical just 30 plus negates. It is a grindy control combo Pendulum deck, which you put all 3 of those together, you're like, what? But it's the only Pendulum deck I have delved into playing, and I actually very well enjoy it. It's actually coming up in the next, we're having a CCS, which I'll have a huge video series starting about the CCS, which is the Colorado Championship Series. And I'll go more onto why that deck is up there in my strategy to potentially take to this event. But without enough about that. So that's what this new archetype is kind of hinting to me to, is as good as Zephyra is, Zephyra can be played as an engine, but most Pendulum players don't even play it. Why is that? Because Zephyra is better in its own strategy. Is this new deck going to be just like that? Is it going to be, okay, it's a good Pendulum deck, but it's better in its own strategy instead of just adding extra cards to that smelting pot of Pendulum cards that Triff calls a deck? Or is it going to be just like the Endymions and practically support that same strategy by just adding a different old mechanism to it, such as spell counters? I don't know. And as most people know, most Pendulum strategies have some sort of lore built into them, so it's going to be very interesting to see if this new deck ties into the lore of Endymion. I think, what's the other one? Endymion, Invoked, and there's that Witchcrafter. It'll be very interesting to see if this new Pendulum deck ties into that. But without further ado, guys, that's practically the end of this discussion, the end of this video. What do you guys think of Pendulums? What do you guys think Pendulums are going to get? Do you think this deck is going to be a standalone deck, or just add more ammo to the Pendulum strategy? If you guys like Pendulums, let me know. But please remember, if you enjoyed this video, to give me a like, comment, and a subscribe. And a huge shout out to my field agent, Flexi, for taking the time to help me make this video. This is Charles from Team COG, signing out.